Let's talk about a name you've definitely heard before, Niccolo Machiavelli. Just saying it conjures up images of shadow-filled rooms, cunning plots, and ruthless politics, right? For 500 years, he's basically been the poster boy for political villainy. But was he really the bad guy everyone makes him out to be, or is there something more going on here? Okay, let's get into it.
You know, when we hear the word Machiavellian today, it's never a compliment. We use it to describe the scheming characters on TV or politicians we don't trust. It's become a shorthand for this win-at-all-costs mindset, where things like ethics and morality just get tossed aside in the pursuit of power.
But you gotta ask, is that really the whole story? To get to the truth, we can't just look at the word itself. We have to look at the world that made the man. And let me tell you, the world he lived in was one of absolute, non-stop chaos.
Right, so to really get Machiavelli, you have to picture Renaissance Italy. And it probably wasn't the peaceful, beautiful place you're imagining. It was, for him, a world completely consumed by chaos.
So just try to imagine this. The Italy Machiavelli knew wasn't one country. It was this fractured mess of 5 separate states that were always at each other's throats. And right in the middle of it all, you had the church, which wasn't just a religious force. Oh no, it was a massive, deeply corrupt political power that was constantly fueling the conflict. Italy was, literally, a house divided and totally vulnerable to being taken over by outsiders. This was the problem he was trying to solve. And this is a really key point. Machiavelli wasn't anti-religion. His problem was with the church as a political institution. He looked at all the fighting and instability and basically pointed his finger right at the church, believing its constant meddling was the #1 thing keeping Italy divided and weak. This idea became the absolute bedrock of his entire political philosophy.
So he laid out his prescription for all this chaos in his famous book, The Prince. But here's the thing you have to understand. This wasn't some lofty philosophical essay. It was a cold, hard, practical survival guide for any ruler trying to get power and, more importantly, keep it.
And this quote, this gets right to the heart of it all. What Machiavelli is saying is, hey, Prince, forget about your ideals. Forget about how you wish the world was. See, if you focus on a perfect world, a what ought to be, while you're living in a brutal, imperfect one, it's just a recipe for disaster. You're not just going to fail, you're going to take your whole state down with you.
And this was a massive shift in thinking. On one side, you had idealists, like Plato, always focused on the world of ideas, on what ought to be. But then Machiavelli comes along, the ultimate realist, and says, nope, a ruler has to live in the real world. They have to deal with people and situations as they are, not as they like them to be. This brought him to a pretty stark conclusion. Politics isn't about being a good person. It's a brutal game. For Machiavelli, being a statesman is simply about the management of power. How you get it, how you use it, and how you hold on to it. That's the whole ballgame. Everything else is just noise.
So, if politics is all about power, and you have to deal with reality, what was his view of human nature? What did he think about the actual people a prince has to govern? Well, let's just say he wasn't a huge fan of us.
According to Machiavelli, this is what a ruler is working with. He thought people are fundamentally selfish. They are ungrateful. Do them a favor and they'll forget it by tomorrow. They're fickle. Their loyalty changes with the wind. They're cowardly. And above all else, they're greedy. This really cynical view of humanity is the foundation for pretty much all of his advice.
And if you want one sentence that sums up his whole dark perspective, this is it. He's saying that people are so driven by greed, by their property, their patrimony, that they would literally get over their own father's death faster than they'd get over losing their inheritance. I mean, wow, it's a shocking thing to say. But for him, this wasn't hyperbole. It was just realism.
Okay, so let's recap. If people are selfish and the only goal is power, what does that mean for morality, for right and wrong? Well, this is where Machiavelli gets really, really controversial. He famously asks the question, is it better for a ruler to be loved or to be feared? Now, being loved is great, he says. It's a kind of soft power. But because people are ungrateful and fickle, you can't rely on it. Fear, on the other hand, is hard power. It's based on coercion. And fear, well, fear is a motivator you can depend on.
So his conclusion was simple and blunt. It is always safer for a prince to be feared than to be loved. Why? Because love is given freely and it can be taken away just as freely. But the fear of punishment, that's a bond that doesn't break.
And that line of thinking leads directly to maybe the most infamous phrase ever linked to his name. For Machiavelli, if the ultimate goal, the end,
is the security and stability of the entire state, then pretty much any action, any means you take to get there is justified.
He built this on a radical idea called dual morality. He's basically arguing that there's one set of moral rules for ordinary people and a completely different set for the ruler. A regular citizen can afford to sacrifice their life for a principle. They can be a martyr. But a prince can never sacrifice the state and all the people in it for some personal moral code.
So, at the end of the day, for a leader, the whole idea of good and evil gets redefined. The only thing that matters, the only true morality, is whether an action secures the national interest. That's it. That's the only measuring stick.
It's pretty easy to see why these ideas were and still are so shocking. But there's just no denying that they've left a huge, enduring legacy on how we all think about politics.
Now, of course, not everyone's on board with this. Idealist thinkers have been pushing back for centuries. Plato would have said that politics must be based on ethics, and much, much later, Gandhi would argue that politics without ethics is a death trap, insisting that how you achieve your goals is just as important as the goals themselves.
And that brings us to the great paradox of Machiavelli. He is arguably the most practiced political thinker in all of history. You can see leaders around the world using his playbook every single day. And yet, not a single one of them would ever stand up and say, "Yep, I'm a Machiavellian."
So, we're back where we started. After looking at his world and hearing his arguments, was he just an evil guy teaching leaders how to be tyrants?
Well, there's a more nuanced way to look at it. Maybe he wasn't immoral, which is knowing the difference between right and wrong and choosing wrong. Maybe he was amoral, arguing that in the very specific, high-stakes arena of state survival, traditional morality just doesn't apply. He separated politics from ethics, not for his own benefit, but for what he saw as the good of the nation.
And that leaves us with one last, pretty unsettling question for today. When you look at the world around us, at the tough game of international politics and power, is it actually possible for a leader to succeed, to protect their country's interests, without being, at least a little bit, Machiavellian? It's something to think about, isn't it?